Hey everybody, this video picks up where my Operation Viking Hammer video left off, which was the end of Operation Viking Hammer and kind of the beginnings of Task Force Viking up in northern Iraq in 2003, and continues to what we usually refer to as OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and so this is kind of the uh, engagement with the Iraqi army that we started to do with the Peshmerga. So transition from basically counterterrorism with the Kurds to the war more conventionally against the Iraqi military. So we left off Viking Hammer down here in Sargat. This is where the Sargat chemical facility was, and this whole uh, enclave over here was Ansar Islam, IGK, and IMK that went all the way down here to BR on way up. You can see that in my other video. But the end of Viking Hammer, my team, which is ODA 081 at the time, which is the first team in Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion of the 10th Special Forces Group. Um, we headed west back to Suleimania, or Suleimania, however people pronounce it different ways. We called it Sully. And over here near the airport, um, which is this is the airstrip that we actually fixed, so the ugly baby could fly in, if you remember that one from history. And we over here, our battalion had a kind of headquarters set up in the Kurdish, in some like Kurdish headquarters, somewhere over here. I don't remember exactly where it was. Um, and from there, we were still driving like our rental cars or whatever the Kurds gave us that we infilled with, like, almost, I guess, 3 or 4 months prior to this. So we come over here, we link up with our commander, we refill ammo, and we get issued like some really nice Land Rovers, like the Land Rover Defenders. Um, And our mission now changes to, okay, we're going after the Iraqi army on the Green Line. Let me talk a little bit about the Green Line. So if you look at all of northern Iraq here, roughly there was a line like this across, it kind of separated northern Iraq, which is Iraqi Kurdistan, from the southern part of Iraq, which is kind of fully Saddam controlled stuff. So at this time in 2003, the two-thirds of the Iraqi army roughly were lined up, uh, along this border for the most part. So what we did is from this place in Suleimania where we were, from Sully, we were told that our mission is to go into an area near a place called Tuz. And I'll try to find twos here real quick. I don't really rehearse for these videos very well. So here's Kirkuk. If you go down, here's twos right here. So the bulk of my unit, you know, 3rd Battalion 10th Group was up around Kirkuk and further north. My team's mission was to come down here and engage the Iraqis along this area of twos. So we headed out of Sully, um, headed west. You know, these roads aren't very good, but I think we went through Cham Chamal and then went out this way somewhere driving. It was actually kind of a pretty interesting, I would call it a Green Beret moment, where our only guidance coming out of Suleimania was to basically head south, go somewhere near Twos, um, figure out where the Iraqi military is, because we're not exactly sure, because they got displaced by some of our initial shock and awe, barrages on them. And also, we didn't know where the Kurds really were in this part of the country. We left the Kurds that we knew kind of in Halabja area. and from after Viking Hammer. So basically, we're like in a couple Land Rovers, driving alone essentially through a war zone, hoping to link up with some friendly Kurds, and then figure out, well, and hopefully that would happen before we ran into some large Iraqi units. So anyway, we headed out. That's how we roll. That was enough guidance for us to operate. So we headed out, came through Cham Chamal, drove way over into these kind of no man's land over here somewhere, and we found a like burned out. It looked like an oil pumping station or something, uh, and we ended up staying there for a while. And on the way, we encountered a couple groups of Kurds who, well, they were Kurds for one, so we got lucky of that, and most of them were PUK Kurds. So we kind of linked up with that group. We settled into this, uh, destroyed, half destroyed building, and started beginning our operations against the Iraqi army. So let's talk about a little bit how that looked, every day. So every day we would basically link up with a few Kurds, maybe, two of our SF guys. Usually our TAC-P was with us too, our Air Force STS guy. Um, and because he was the one who's going to really control the aircraft. We were all kind of cross trained in that, but he was the master of aircraft. So he got a lot of work because he went out every time. Not all of us went out every time. So anyway, we jump in the back of pickups with Kurds, and we would essentially, kind of do a infill so we could observe these Iraqis. I'm going to turn on the imagery here so you can see what the terrain here looks like. So along this, let me try to find Tews. Here's Tews, the city, and this here is actually a ridge line. Let's see if there's any decent 3D mode here. Like there were Iraqis all along this ridge, Iraqi military, thousands of them, I would guess, and all along this road over here. So you can see how kind of gnarly this terrain is. It's like moonscape almost. So what we would do is drive up, along roads like this one. I don't know if it was that road, but and then we would kind of pick a wadi and drive as far as we could, and then eventually dismount and essentially find we used to call them OPs, an observation point, and then hunker down there and get aircraft on station, or get AWACS and all that, and start calling in airstrikes. And we did this for, I don't know, a month and a half or two, and I'll tell you, we devastated the Iraqis. So we would the Iraqi military, and so we would sneak in, set up an OP, call aircraft, and just decimate the Iraqi positions along this ridge and along these other areas here. Um, they fired artillery at us a few times. There was some times where they attempted to maneuver on us, um, but usually either other Kurdish elements would take care of that, or we would, just exfil. Um, Part of our mission here was to actually keep these units in the north. So it wasn't necessarily like we were trying to defeat them outright. It was almost like a harassing campaign, where we were keeping them busy. Uh, Another thing, like they were helpless basically against our technology and our bombings. Like we were just slaying them. It got to the point where we were kind of almost wondering if we should be getting them to actually surrender, because we were wondering how we're going to have a security force like after the war is over. So my captain and I one time were talking about that. So we're decimating the entire Iraqi army. But what's going to happen when we like transition government? Who's going to become the new military? So anyway, there were concerns about that. Um, Not to mention, I got to be honest, like it was pretty disturbing after a while how just the sheer amount of carnage of uh, running these airstrikes day in and day out. Um, so like I said, we did that for I guess about 2 months, um, and then a big might not have been that long, I don't remember, but then we kind of switched gears and the big attack into Kirkuk took place. Remember, Kirkuk is up here. Kirkuk's a big city, not big. It's not a big city, but it's a bigger place, and also it's kind of a historical thing for the Kurds, and there's oil involved in there. So there's a lot of dynamics around Kirkuk and the Kurds. So I think the way it went down fairly suddenly, from my perspective, was that my unit, all the other ODAs on my unit, led about, I don't know, I think it was like 20 or 30,000 Kurds into Kirkuk. Huge force of, Peshmerga, and we down here moved out into twos with a couple thousand, uh, kind of at the roughly the same time. So we on this night, it was very sudden to me. Although I might just not have been paying attention. I was kind of your average 18 Bravo at that time, but um, anyway, on a minute's notice, it was like everybody get your shit in the vehicles. We're moving out and we're going into twos. And that was in like late afternoon, and you know, we, Green Berets travel light. It's not like we were in some kind of base camp uh, where there's a Burger King and all that stuff like you hear about later. That stuff kind of amazes me actually, but we were just living out of our rucksack basically in our vehicle. So real quick, we jumped in, linked up with some Kurds on the way, and started driving towards Kirkuk towards twos. As we approached, of course, firefights are breaking out, and it's typical. It's typical war. Here we are again, like moving towards the sound of bombs and gunfire. And at that point, one of the most harrowing things I think that happened during the war, and probably in my life, was we encountered a minefield on the way into twos, because there weren't many roads, the way that we came in here, and I don't remember the exact way, but I'm pretty sure we came out over here somewhere or up here. I don't remember on this road that goes into twos. But anyway, somewhere in here we encountered a minefield, and we encountered it. We knew we were in it when the Kurdish truck hit one of the mines that was kind of leading our small convoy through the rocky, you know, kind of rocky desert type environment that it is up there. And I don't know. It was scary. So typical minefield scenario, I guess, that they like teach you in boot camp is when you encounter the mine, the first mine, you actually don't know how far in you are to the minefield. Maybe you've just gotten lucky for quite a while. So your options are limited to, do you go back or do you just keep going? Since we didn't know how far in we went, and we weren't sure um, whether this was like a random mine or something. So anyway, our decision was to keep going forward. So what we did was, and when the mine struck the vehicle, of course, everybody started freaking out. The Kurds were jumping out of vehicles and screaming in Kurdish. Oh, and I forgot to mention it. It was nighttime, so this is the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, it's like pitch black. We're driving through this rocky desert in a Land Rover. The Kurdish truck in front of us hits a mine. Kurds jump out of vehicles along with our guys, and we're shining flashlights all over the ground looking for looking for mines. So I was actually driving one of the Land Rovers, so I just stayed put in the driver's seat. So anyway, it turned out there were a lot of mines, and luckily in one of our vehicles we had a box of those like little baby chem lights. I don't know if everybody's ever seen them, but they're in little packages about this big, and you break them and they glow at night. They're actually fairly bright, the little things. So we handed those out to the Kurds, and we said, find the mines and mark them with these chem lights. Um, and I don't know how long, but it was probably one of the most terrifying nights of my life, straddling chem lights in an armorless Land Rover for I don't know hours, um, through basically this environment. And I was the only one driving. Everyone else was, well, there were actually two or three Land Rovers, each with a driver. I was one of the drivers. So, and I always hated driving, by the way. But anyway, yeah, harrowing moment. You're waiting to become red mist at like any second. It was terrifying. But we kept going. Um, we were cracking jokes with each other that I was going to become red mist at any moment. Stuff like that. Little dark humor in the middle of the night in a minefield. But we ended up making our way to pavement, and we all were thankful for that. And then we drove into twos. It was a total firefight everywhere around us in twos. We didn't get in a firefight. Like I think we came in a little late because of the minefield. Um, we showed up, and all kinds of fighting, dead people all over the place. There were people on the road that had been ran over by tanks. There was all kinds of gore and violence that went on. But what happened was next is we ended up linking up with some Kurdish leader, and he brought us literally into like somebody's house, and we just hunkered down in this house for the night, or no, not the night. We actually got there kind of in the morning, uh, late morning, probably like 4 in the morning, still dark. Actually, it was, but no, the light was actually coming up, so it must have been like 5 or 6 in the morning. So anyway, we came in there and racked out for a couple hours. Well, you know, some of the initial, battles and stuff kind of faded out. And then later on, um, we came out of there and moved over to where the PUK Kurds, had essentially secured an area. I think it was like an old schoolhouse that was, kind of half destroyed. And we set up in there. We had a good Kurdish unit kind of surrounding us. We moved into this little burnt out part of the building, and that was home for the next couple months. Um, so essentially, we had taken twos, uh, for what it's worth, and then until we realized that we didn't really take twos, we didn't take it over completely. We we just were one of the many factions of groups that moved into there as the Iraqis moved out. So within a couple days, we discovered that there were like 16 different factions of militant groups operating in two. So in this tiny little place here, mostly on this side of the bridge, there were 16 different groups, and that was how many I remember that we counted. So so people realize this. There are in this part of Iraq there are Turkoman groups. There were four of those. There were Kurdish groups, so not just PUK, but there was like PKK, and there's other factional Kurdish groups as well. Then there was just militant like Arab groups, um, many of those there, and one of the terrorist groups that we bombed up in Kermal, which was the group called IGK. They even had like a place in twos. So yeah, it was total actual chaos. What happened was you've got the Iraqi control of this town. We, essentially push out the Iraqi military. And now it's basically a fight for terrain and resources in that town. So now you got like these 16 different factional groups. It's kind of an ethno-religious tribal dynamic. Each one has its own little compound with its own armed militants kind of standing outside. So that was like the environment in twos after we pushed out the Iraqi military. We did some excursions out of twos into, way out into here. I don't remember exactly where, but you can tell out here it starts to get very desert-like. We went all the way down to this river here, and at one point almost all the way to Tikrit, which is right here, right there. So I think we went to the edge of this river at one point, but so our area, you could say, of operations was roughly this this area right here. So we went to different groups and different um, tribes and all that kind of stuff all over the place. And eventually, we, as the war started, ending, it didn't end, of course, but everybody was wondering what are we supposed to do now? We were like, okay, we beat Ansar Islam. We moved to the Green Line and we pushed the Iraqis out of here. We either killed them or they basically just quit and went AWOL by the thousands. We've occupied twos. There are 16 different factions. What are we supposed to be doing? Was kind of our question. And we kind of had to answer the question ourselves, if I remember correctly. And the thing that we deduced was, I guess we just need to figure out what's going on and report for situational awareness. Uh, and that's what we did. So we broke up into two-man groups and we started doing just random meetings with different people and factions and trying to establish situational awareness. One of the most memorable of those, there's actually two different ones that are memorable. I always went out with myself and the warrant officer on my team, Chief Lopez, and we one of our most insane encounters was when we actually met with IGK, the terrorist group. Which, by the way, we were like, are we supposed to kill these guys now? Are we supposed to keep killing these guys? Or is that part of this over? I could do, in other words, should we be mounting an attack on this IGK, compound? That was not clear at the time. So we decided ad hoc that, we're just let's talk to these guys and see what's going on. So we did. We literally, the two of us with an interpreter, and the interpreter was terrified to the point of almost running away, was to just pull up in front, get out, and ask if we can talk to whoever's in charge. So that's what we did. Pull up in a Land Rover, two gringos jump out, um, two bearded, you know, fighters with like, the bandana with Islamic writing on their head, standing there with AKs. I think one of them might have had a PKM actually. And we just walked up to them. I think they had the same confusion we did. Like, they were looking at us like, should we be killing these Americans? Or or are we not trying to do that anymore because we got decimated last time we supported Ansar Islam? So they were confused. I could tell when I'm walking up to them. I'd had some experience with this in the Balkans before too, by the way. I'm gonna maybe make another video about some of that stuff. But, in real quick, in parts of like Bosnia in the late '90s, there were still pockets of people that weren't sure whether or not they should fight other people because of they were isolated. So anyway, there can be confusion at these like transitional moments, especially when guidance really isn't that clear. So anyway, we walk up to these dudes and uh, they're scared. They're wondering if they should kill us. And instinctually, just to put them at ease, we just kind of reached out to, show them we're not coming up to try to shoot them. And anyway, they went and got their leader, and they this guy came out, similar dude. He looked like one thing that struck me is he looked like all the dead Ansar Islam guys that I had just looked at a couple weeks before. That's what came in my head. So I'm like, here I am eating with these guys. Uh, I wasn't really sure if I should be, but we did. Um, so anyway, we sit down with this guy literally in like plastic lawn chairs in the front of their little compound, which is kind of like a large house with barbed wire around it. Uh, Probably 6 or 8 more of these, militant guys came out behind us. I'm waiting to get killed at any second, of course. I'm like, uh, but they brought out tea, and we sat there with this dude and drank tea. And the first thing he asked us is why we killed them in Kermal. Uh, and I'd learned again back in the Balkans. I learned that like you're in a situation like this, you don't try to bullshit somebody. They'll sniff it out in a heartbeat, and then you could be in serious trouble. So I just answered them frankly. I'm like, you guys were supporting Ansar Islam, and you are actually a terrorist group. So you were a legitimate target to decimate, to cover our rears when we came and went after the Iraqis. So it's kind of like a sorry, not sorry type thing that we told that guy. And he was like, you know, he, he seemed to just accept that, which I don't know what else would he do. You got two Americans who, have basically the most advanced technology behind them if they want to bring it to bear in the world. So the dude probably was in his best interest to agree. And anyway, he did try to tell us that IGK was never a terrorist group and it never supported Ansar. And we basically got them all wrong. Anyway, it ended up being, um, we've ended up leaving there uh, thinking basically this guy was just trying to keep us from killing them all again. Um, but in talking with other groups about them, they were just another random group at that time. There was no one there just to kind of mount any kind of operation. So we never actually did anything more with them. I mean, against them. So that was one interesting endeavor. Um, I think about that moment a lot. Um, when I describe it, I'm probably not doing the stress of it much justice, but um, tea with terrorists, probably, the tagline for that. Then another time, we were trying to figure out these Turkoman groups. So the Turkoman groups were not, friendly towards the Kurdish groups, and of course we were with the Kurdish groups. We were protected by them, and they were pretty much they were our allies. So one time we decided similar scenario. Let's just pull up to one of these Turkoman compounds. There were 4 different Turkoman groups that we remember, and actually they didn't necessarily all like each other either. But by the way, there was always like little fights and firefights and battles between these different groups, kind of at random. Um, so anyway, we walked into one of these Turkoman compounds. Uh, they were a lot less. It was a lot less tense than the IGK guys, but it was still tense because we didn't know their loyalties, especially since they knew that we were kind of embedded with the Kurds, which they don't like. So anyway, we end up walking in here. Um, Similar feeling that they're basically afraid of Americans, as they should be. and um, we met with their leader. Now, that's not the interesting thing that happened in this particular scenario. The interesting thing that happened here is that there was a Turkish special forces guy with these dudes, and we kind of discovered him by accident when we walked in the building so suddenly, and kind of turned around this one corner in this part of the building, and there this dude was with Oakley's kicked back on his slicked back, you know, hair, dark black hair, very fancy uh, kit with a super nice M4 with you know high end optics on it and stuff like that. This guy stood out quite a bit from the rest of the crew there. And anyway, he saw us and his eyes got real big. We saw him, and similarly, probably our eyes got big. And but we both ended up saying like, oh, I guess we're discovered, and what are we going to do? So we ended up sitting down and just kind of shooting the shit with this guy for a few minutes. And actually, we were talking. He spoke English. We were talking about different optics for M4s for a while, and then we were kind of like, hopefully, we don't have to kill each other in the next couple weeks. So let's just do what we got to do. So anyway, he we ended up saying bye and just leaving that place. So these are some of the bizarre, you know, micro histories of these types of weird scenarios here. Um, let's see. I did have some talking points I wanted to hit here. Yeah. Um, here's another quick thing. Like, it's actually hilarious in hindsight that if anybody thought that Iraq was going to go down smoothly, like, hey, we're going to go in, we're going to destroy a few terrorist groups and the Iraqi army, and then everything's going to be great because Saddam's gone. That is literally a joke. When you're in a town like this, at the end of the quote unquote end of a war, we knew immediately this is not gonna go well. The all of these groups are gonna fight. There's not really an Iraqi security force, and some of these little groups are gonna blossom and become dominant, and it's gonna be crazy. So anyway, I think I hit most of my points. There was yeah, one more thing I'll add, and before I kind of wrap it up here is uh, the PKK was active. Or I just clicked by mistake. The PKK was around here, and back before when I was telling you about doing airstrikes on the Iraqis. The One of these times it was me and like one of the other guys on my team plus our Air Force guy went out to an OP. And by the way we did this, we just left our compound and drove towards the Iraqi front line, and we knew we would encounter some Kurds. And when we did, they would either jump in the back of our thing or we would jump in theirs, and we would head out together and do some damage. It was ad hoc like that. Um, so one day that happened. We encountered a group that had like two pickups, like those little pickup trucks, um, and they were Kurds, to us. So I linked up with them. I said, "Do you guys want to go drop some bombs?" And they said yes, and they got all excited. They're always saying Sierra, Sierra, which is the planes. They thought all of us, by the way, had our own personal fighter jet that we could just dictate what it did, individually, which was kind of hilarious. But anyway, we jumped in the truck with them, went out, dropped a couple bombs, and then like this was a kind of a unique instance where we dropped some bombs, but then the Iraqis did actually kind of maneuver toward us. And what these guys did is they actually took off and attacked the Iraqis. um, which we stayed where we stayed put, kind of as Overwatch. But I don't know, 6 or 8 of those guys went in and basically attacked them, and we told them they were crazy. Like, there's like 10 tanks and like 400 dudes on the Iraqi side, and you're going to take 6 guys and attack them? Not really a good idea. Not until we drop a few bombs, a few more bombs. I mean, anyway, these guys come back all wounded. There's like 2 or 3 of them are wounded, and then we end up exfilling back out, and then we drove all the way with them to like where they were. You could just say, staged or camped out for their little unit. And it was at that point that they told us that they weren't PUK Kurds, and I was like, oh, then what are you? And they said they're communist Kurds, and I was like, here I am. I didn't know that much about this area actually, and I was like, okay, you know. So then we started getting a little bit nervous, like, okay, well, who are you guys? And basically, the extent was that they were communist Kurds, not PUK. Now, does that mean PKK? I'm not sure actually, but I'm saying it as an example of how kind of dynamic it was on the ground there. And if you actually think about the more current events, when we like pulled out recently from like Syria on the Kurds and all that, like, don't think of the Kurds as a giant monolithic ethnic element. You know, you know, they're, to be honest, like, they're not all good. And they're also not all bad. And it also depends on what our interests are and what we're using them for and who we're using them against. So, yeah, be careful. Be careful what you think about the Kurds. It could be biased either one way or the other. So just anytime you hear about Kurds, try to objectively reason about it and actually try to figure it out. But anyway, I'm kind of digressing now. But I did want to wrap up the whole thing here. Like, a couple big takeaways for me were, um, things that I can't ever stop thinking about in my life are the just horrific bombings of the Iraqis, and the you know just brutal how our firepower has just decimated them over and over for weeks. Always stuck in my memories, the minefield. You don't forget driving through a minefield. So I can only imagine what it's like in like Ukraine. I mean, the Iraqi war is nothing compared to what's going on in Ukraine. Anyway, the other thing is, all the time now in the news, as like an Iraqi, OIF vet, you're like, everybody's always talking about how this is the war that should have never happened, and it was a corrupt. Uh, the whole decision to go there was corrupt. You know, whatever, all that stuff. So here's my kind of opinion on that is, um, yeah, I guess. Hold on, I accidentally clicked here. Um, I look at it like this. I was a soldier then, and I was a special forces guy, but still a soldier. And like, I didn't decide to go there. You know, in fact, I I wanted to go to war when I was a Green Beret in the army. That's why you don't become a Green Beret in the army because you don't want to go to war. That's like saying you became a NFL football player, but you don't want to go to the Super Bowl. Like, it's not possible. So anyway, when I look at it, I'm like, I didn't decide to go in there. I wanted to be a soldier. I volunteered. So I don't really, from that perspective, if I can't control why we went in there, I don't really worry about it nowadays. And also, like, I don't feel like things should end up the way that I expect them to. You know, if no one promised me that, like, the war would end well and everything would be fine. So I didn't have an expectation that it would. I'm like, basically, I boil it down to, I went in there, I did what we were supposed to do. Our team succeeded very well at the missions that we did. The strategic elements of it, were out of my control, and there's nothing anybody can really do about it. Do I think we should have had a better plan? Yes. I mean, in hindsight, should we have gone in there? I don't know. I think it was probably good that we destroyed some of these terrorist groups and all that. Saddam was definitely a dirtbag, but he also was part of what kept some of the country from plunging into chaos. So, trade-offs there. You know. So anyway, I just wanted to give a little insight into that. I actually don't think about that aspect of it that much. You know, I did my duty. So now I'm starting to ramble. I'm going to cut it off. And thanks for watching. Um, you know, leave comments or whatever if you want to add or anything or refute anything or whatever. Thank you guys for listening.